I walked through the front door of our sprawling Beverly Hills mansion, my mind still reeling from the incredible news I'd just received at my agent's office. After years of struggling to make it as an actress, I'd finally landed the lead role in a major Hollywood blockbuster. I couldn't wait to tell Greg. But as I made my way upstairs, an unsettling feeling washed over me. Something wasn't right. Muffled noises were coming from the bedroom, feminine giggles mixed with masculine grunts. My heart raced as I pushed open the door. There, tangled in the sheets of our marital bed, was Greg, and wrapped around him like a python was his young assistant, Trina. "What the hell is going on here?" I screamed, my voice shaking with rage and disbelief. They scrambled to cover themselves, but it was too late. I'd seen everything. "Amber, I can explain," Greg sputtered, his face flushed with guilt. "Oh, really? Please do explain how your naked assistant ended up in our bed." I spat back. Trina just smirked, not even bothering to look ashamed. She slinked out of the bed and started putting on her clothes, eyeing me like I was an annoying pest. "You need to leave. Now," I said through gritted teeth, pointing at Trina. She just laughed, a cruel, mocking sound. "Oh, Amber, you really are clueless, aren't you? This house, everything in it, it's all mine now. Greg and I are in love. You're just in the way." I saw red. I lunged at her, ready to physically throw her out if I had to. But Greg leapt up and held me back. "Don't, Amber. There's no point," he said coldly. "I want a divorce. Trina and I are going to be together now. You need to accept that." I wrenched myself out of his grasp, my whole body shaking. This couldn't be happening. 12 years of marriage, and it had come to this? Being tossed aside for a younger model half my age? I couldn't even look at Greg as angry, devastated tears streamed down my face. "How could you do this to me? After everything we've been through, I gave up my career for you." "Oh, please, what career?" Trina interjected nastily. "Doing toothpaste commercials and begging for bit parts? Face it, Amber, your so-called career was going nowhere. You should be thanking Greg for funding your pathetic life all these years with his family's money." My hand itched to slap the smug look right off her face. But I wouldn't give either of them the satisfaction of seeing me fall apart. I had to get out of there. "You know what? You two deserve each other," I said, my voice icy with disdain. "But Trina, a word of advice. If he'll cheat with you, he'll cheat on you. Ask me how I know." With that, I turned on my heel and stormed out, my head held high, even as my heart shattered into a million jagged pieces. I had no idea what I was going to do or where I was going to go. All I knew was that I couldn't stay there a minute longer. Not with the two of them polluting the home that had once been filled with so much love and promise. As I peeled out of the driveway, a chilling realization hit me. In the eyes of the law, that house did belong to Greg now that he wanted me out of the picture. 12 years as his wife, and I'd be left with nothing. But I'd be damned if I let Trina have the satisfaction of taking everything from me. I didn't know how yet, but one way or another, I was going to make them pay for betraying me like this. They had no idea the depths of the hell I was going to rain down on them. I drove aimlessly for hours, my mind spinning with the enormity of Greg's betrayal. How had it come to this? When we first met 12 years ago, everything had seemed so perfect. I was a struggling actress then, waiting tables between auditions and barely scraping by. Greg was one of my regulars, a charming businessman who always left generous tips. He pursued me relentlessly, showing up at the restaurant every day with extravagant gifts and grand romantic gestures. Looking back, I suppose I was dazzled by his wealth and persistence. His family owned a lucrative chain of luxury car dealerships, and he had never wanted for anything. Compared to my hand-to-mouth existence, his life seemed like a fairy tale. When he proposed after only 6 months of dating, I said yes without hesitation. It was like a dream come true, the struggling actress marrying her wealthy Prince Charming. His family welcomed me with open arms, hosting a lavish wedding at their sprawling estate. But the cracks started to show soon after the honeymoon. Greg grew restless and bored, spending more and more late nights out with his buddies. The first time I caught him cheating, he swore it was a mistake, that it would never happen again. I wanted so badly to believe him. I had already given up my career and independence to become Mrs. Greg Thompson. The alternative, going back to my old life as a nobody, was too humiliating to contemplate. so I looked the other way, focusing on decorating our new house and playing the role of the perfect corporate wife as family functions. Every time I found lipstick on his collar or smelled unfamiliar perfume, I told myself it was nothing, that he would change, but he never did. The affairs became more frequent and blatant. The women got younger and younger until they were barely out of college. When I tried to confront him, he would just laugh and tell me I was being paranoid, that I should be grateful he still came home to me at all. I put up with it for 12 long years, clinging to the lifestyle and status his name provided. What a fool I was. All that time, he was just biding his time until someone better came along, someone like Trina. I met her once at the annual company Christmas party. She was Greg's new assistant, all long legs and bouncy blonde hair. The way he looked at her made my skin crawl. When I tried to point out how inappropriately close they seemed, he flew into a rage, accusing me of embarrassing him in front of his colleagues. Now it all made sense. He had probably been sleeping with her for months, maybe even years, grooming her to take my place while I played the clueless wife. Well, the joke was on him. I wasn't about to slink away quietly into the night and leave them to play house in the home I had poured my heart into for the past decade. I didn't care how long it took or what I had to do. I was going to make them suffer for this. As I finally pulled into my best friend Jill's driveway, the beginnings of a plan started to take shape in my mind. Jill had never liked Greg, always saying there was something slimy about him beneath the polished exterior. She would help me get my revenge. "Amber, what's wrong?" Jill asked as I collapsed into her arms on her doorstep, my body racked with sobs. "It's Greg," I choked out. "I caught him in bed with his assistant. He wants a divorce so he can be with her. After everything I've sacrificed for him, he's leaving me with nothing." Jill's eyes flashed with anger. "Oh, honey, I'm so sorry, but you know what? This is going to be the biggest mistake that little homewrecker ever made. We're going to make them pay for this. Together." I nodded, a grim smile spreading across my tear-stained face. Trina had no idea who she was messing with, but she was about to find out. As I sat on Jill's couch nursing a strong drink, I poured out the whole sordid story. Jill listened intently, her face growing more and more disgusted with each detail. "I just can't believe Trina would be so bold as to think she could just steal your husband and your home out from under you," Jill said, shaking her head. "I mean, the level of entitlement is just staggering." I nodded, taking a big gulp of my drink. "You're telling me." The way she was smirking at me, acting like she had already won, it made me want to claw her eyes out. Jill was quiet for a moment, seeming to mull something over. Then she looked at me with a serious expression. "Amber, there's something you should know about Trina. Something I didn't tell you before because I didn't want to upset you. But now, well, I think you need to hear it." My stomach twisted with dread. "What is it?" Jill sighed. "A few months ago, I overheard Trina talking to some of the other assistants at the company picnic. She was bragging about how she had Greg wrapped around her little finger, that he was going to leave you for her and she was going to take over as the lady of the house. I felt like I had been punched in the gut. "She actually said that? In public?" Jill nodded grimly. "That's not even the worst part. She was laughing about how easy it was to seduce Greg, saying that all men are the same and will always choose a younger model over their aging wife. She called you, well, she used some pretty nasty words I won't repeat." Rage boiled up inside me, hot and blinding. How dare that little bitch talk about me that way? Act like I was just some disposable obstacle in her path to landing a rich husband? "She's in for a rude awakening," I said through clenched teeth. "When I'm done with her, she'll be lucky if she can get a job scrubbing toilets." Jill leaned forward, a glint of determination in her eye. "Damn right she will, and I'm going to help you make sure of it." She reached into her purse and pulled out her phone. Lucky for us, I had the foresight to record Trina shooting her mouth off at the picnic. I had a feeling it might come in handy one day. My eyes widened as Jill hit play and Trina's haughty voice filled the room, bragging about her conquest of Greg and disparaging me in the crudest terms. It was even worse than Jill had described. "That scheming little skank," I seethed. "She's not going to know what hit her." Jill grinned wickedly. "Oh, we're going to hit her where it hurts the most. Her reputation and her bank account." No respectable company will touch her once they hear how she talks about her boss's wife behind closed doors. I nodded, my mind racing with the possibilities. Trina fancied herself a sophisticated seductress, but she had no idea who she was dealing with. I had clawed my way up from nothing to get where I was today. I knew how to fight dirty when I had to. First things first, I need to secure my position, I said decisively. Trina seems awfully confident that she's just going to be able to move into my house and take over my life. I need to find a way to stop that from happening. Jill tapped her perfectly manicured nails against her chin, deep in thought. Suddenly, her eyes lit up. Amber, what if there was a way for you to keep the house, even if Greg does divorce you? A way to make sure Trina ends up with nothing, no matter what lies she's been telling herself? I leaned forward eagerly. I'm listening. Jill smiled slowly. I think it's time we took a little trip down to the county courthouse and did some digging into your dear departed father-in-law's will. Something tells me he might have left a surprise or two that Trina hasn't factored into her grand plans. For the first time since I walked in on Greg and Trina, I felt a spark of hope. Jill was right. It was time to stop playing the devastated wife and start playing hardball. And I was going to start by beating Trina at her own game. Armed with Jill's recording of Trina's vicious gloating, I stormed back to the house to confront Greg. I found him in the living room, sipping a scotch without a care in the world. Well, look who finally decided to come crawling back, he sneered as I walked in. I was starting to think you had run off to lick your wounds somewhere. I ignored his jab, holding up my phone with the recording queued up. You might want to put down that drink, Greg. I have something you need to hear. He rolled his eyes but set down his glass with an exaggerated sigh. I hit play, and Trina's voice filled the room, bragging about her conquest and mocking me in the most degrading terms. Greg's face paled as he listened, his eyes widening in shock. When it was over, he looked at me with a mix of anger and fear. Where did you get that? He demanded. Does it matter? I shot back. The point is, your precious little girlfriend has been running her mouth all over town about how she seduced you and how she's going to take my place. She's made a fool of you, Greg. He had the nerve to laugh. Is that what you think this is about? Me being made a fool of? Wake up, Amber. I'm not the one who's going to end up looking like a fool when this is all over. I stared at him, incredulous. Are you seriously trying to turn this around on me? You're the one who cheated, Greg. You're the one who threw away our marriage for some conniving little gold digger. His face twisted with rage. Don't you dare talk about Trina that way. She's twice the woman you'll ever be. At least she actually appreciates me and doesn't just see me as a meal ticket. I recoiled as if he had slapped me. Is that really what you think of me? That I only married you for your money? He shrugged, a cruel smile playing on his lips. Why else would you have? It's not like you had anything else going for you. Your so-called acting career was a joke. You should be thanking me for giving you a life of luxury all these years. Tears stung my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. I wouldn't give him the satisfaction of seeing how much his words hurt. You're a real piece of work, you know that? I said, my voice shaking with anger. I gave up everything for you. I loved you. And this is how you repay me? He just smirked. Love? Don't make me laugh. You love the lifestyle, Amber. The fancy house, the expensive clothes, the status of being Mrs. Greg Thompson. Well, guess what? Those days are over. Trina is going to be my wife now, and there's nothing you can do about it. I felt like I was going to be sick. How could I have ever loved this vile, selfish man? You're right, Greg, I said quietly. There is something I can do about it. I can make sure that you and your little homewrecker end up with nothing. That you lose everything, just like you're trying to do to me. He scoffed. And how exactly do you plan on doing that? In case you've forgotten, this is my house. My money. You have no claim to any of it. I smiled slowly, relishing the look of confusion on his face. That's where you're wrong, Greg. You see, your father was a very smart man. He knew exactly what kind of person you are, and he made sure that I would be protected, even if you tried to screw me over. Greg's face drained of color. What are you talking about? I pulled a folded document out of my purse and held it up. I'm talking about your father's will, Greg. The one that leaves this house and a sizable chunk of his estate to me and me alone. He changed it years ago, right after your first affair. Apparently, he didn't trust you not to do exactly what you're trying to do now." I watched with satisfaction as the reality of the situation dawned on him. Trina might have thought she had won, but she was about to learn the hard way that I always have an ace up my sleeve. Greg snatched the document out of my hand, his eyes scanning the pages frantically. With each passing second, his face grew paler, and his hands started to shake. This can't be real," he stammered. "Dad would never have done this to me. He knew how much this house meant to me." I laughed bitterly. "Did he, Greg, or did he just know what a selfish, cheating bastard you are and want to make sure your wife wouldn't end up on the street when you inevitably traded her in for a younger model?" Greg looked up at me, his eyes blazing with fury. "You think you're so clever, don't you? Well, let me tell you something, Amber. This little stunt of yours changes nothing. I'm still divorcing you, and Trina is still going to be my wife." I smiled coldly. "Oh, I don't think so, Greg. You see, this house is mine now, bought and paid for with your daddy's money, and I'll be damned if I let you and your little whore play house in it." His face turned an alarming shade of purple. "You can't do this. I'll fight you in court. I'll tie this up for years if I have to." I shrugged. "Go ahead, but just remember, I have Trina on tape admitting to seducing you and conspiring to take over my life. How do you think that's going to play in front of a judge? Face it, Greg, you've lost." For a moment, I thought he might actually hit me. His fists clenched at his sides, and he took a menacing step forward. But then, just as quickly, all the fight seemed to drain out of him. He slumped down onto the couch, his head in his hands. "I can't believe this is happening," he mumbled. "How did everything get so screwed up?" For a split second, I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. But then I remembered the years of lies and betrayal, the humiliation of being cast aside for a younger woman. No, Greg didn't deserve my pity. He deserved to suffer, just like he had made me suffer. I leaned down so my face was level with his. "You did this to yourself, Greg. You and Trina. Did you really think I was just going to roll over and let you two walk all over me? I may have been a naive little actress when you married me, but I'm not that girl anymore. I'm a survivor, and I always come out on top." With that, I straightened up and walked towards the door, my head held high. I paused in the doorway and looked back at Greg's pathetic, hunched form. "I'll have my lawyer contact you to work out the details of the divorce. In the meantime, I think it's best if you find somewhere else to stay. This is my house now, and I don't want you in it." I didn't wait for his response. I strode out of the room, feeling lighter than I had in years. It was really over. I was free of Greg and his toxic influence once and for all. But my work wasn't done yet. Trina was still out there, probably waiting for Greg to come running to her with the good news that he had left his wife. Well, she was in for a rude awakening. I pulled out my phone and dialed Jill's number. "It's me," I said when she picked up. "Phase 1 is complete. Greg is out of the picture. Now it's time to move on to Phase 2. "Destroying Trina?" Jill asked, a hint of glee in her voice. I grinned, feeling a rush of wicked anticipation. "Destroying Trina," I confirmed, "and making sure she never forgets the name Amber Thompson." Jill laughed. "I almost feel sorry for the girl. She has no idea what's about to hit her." "Oh, I don't know," I said, looking back at the closed door to the living room, where Greg was probably still wallowing in self-pity. "I think she's about to get a pretty good idea. And trust me, it's not going to be pretty." I didn't have to wait long for Trina to make her move. Less than an hour after I kicked Greg out, she came sauntering through the front door like she owned the place. "Amber," she called out in a sickly sweet voice. "Are you here? Greg told me the good news. I'm so sorry things had to end this way, but I'm sure you understand. It's time for you to move on." I emerged from the kitchen, a cold smile on my face. "Trina, darling, I'm afraid Greg was a little premature in his announcement. You see, this house belongs to me now, and I'm not going anywhere." Trina's eyes narrowed. "What are you talking about? Greg said he was divorcing you. That means this house is his." I laughed. "Oh, you poor, naive little girl. Did you really think it would be that easy? That you could just bat your eyelashes and spread your legs and everything Greg owned would be yours? I hate to break it to you, but you've been played." Trina's face flushed with anger. I don't know what kind of game you think you're playing, Amber, but it won't work. Greg loves me. He's going to marry me. I held up the copy of my father-in-law's will. I don't think so, sweetheart. You see, this document proves that this house belongs to me, not Greg. His father left it to me in his will, along with a sizable chunk of the family fortune. Greg gets nothing. Trina snatched the paper out of my hand, her eyes scanning it frantically. I watched with satisfaction as the color drained from her face. This can't be real, she stammered. Greg said he promised. I smiled coldly. Greg says a lot of things, most of them lies. You really should have done your homework before you decided to wreck a marriage, Trina. You might have discovered that the man you were so eager to spread your legs for is nothing but a pathetic, dishonest snake. Trina's eyes filled with tears. But he said he loved me, that he was going to leave you for me. I almost felt a twinge of pity for her. Almost. But then I remembered the cruel way she had mocked me, the delight she had taken in trying to steal my life out from under me. Oh, grow up, Trina, I snapped. Greg doesn't love you. He doesn't love anyone but himself. He was just using you to stroke his ego and get back at me. And now that he's lost everything, he'll toss you aside just like he tossed me. Trina shook her head stubbornly. No, you're wrong. Greg and I are meant to be together. This is just a temporary setback. He'll find a way to fix this. I laughed harshly. You just keep telling yourself that, honey? In the meantime, I want you out of my house. You have 5 minutes to gather your things and get the hell out before I call the police and have you arrested for trespassing. Trina glared at me, her fists clenched at her sides. For a moment, I thought she might actually try to fight me, but then, with a sob of defeat, she turned and fled up the stairs. I watched her go, feeling a sense of grim satisfaction. It was really over. I had won. Trina was out of my life, and Greg was left with nothing, just like he deserved. A few minutes later, Trina came back down the stairs, a single suitcase in hand. Her face was blotchy and streaked with tears, but I felt no sympathy. This isn't over, Amber, she hissed as she pushed past me towards the door. I'll find a way to make you pay for this. I just smiled. Good luck with that, Trina. I think you'll find that I'm not so easy to beat. Now get the hell out of my house before I throw you out myself. With one last venomous glare, Trina wrenched open the door and stormed out, slamming it behind her. I watched through the window as she threw her suitcase into her car and peeled out of the driveway, tires squealing. I let out a long, slow breath. It was done. I had my revenge. And now, finally, I could start to pick up the pieces of my shattered life and move on. But first, there was one more loose end to tie up. I picked up my phone and dialed a number I knew by heart. Jill, I said when she answered. It's time. Let's destroy the bitch once and for all. Jill and I wasted no time putting our plan into action. The very next day, we marched into Greg's office, the recording of Trina's vicious gloating queued up and ready to go. Greg's secretary tried to stop us, but I pushed past her, barging into Greg's office without knocking. He looked up from his desk, startled. Amber? What the hell are you doing here? He sputtered. I smiled coldly. Just tying up some loose ends, darling. I thought your colleagues might be interested to hear what your mistress really thinks of you behind closed doors. Before he could react, I hit play on my phone. Trina's voice filled the room, bragging about how she had seduced Greg, mocking his intelligence and manhood. Greg's face turned a sickly shade of gray as he listened. When the recording ended, he looked up at me with a mix of fear and rage in his eyes. You bitch, he hissed. You think you can blackmail me with this? I'll have you arrested for illegal recording. Jill laughed. Go ahead and try, Greg, but I think you'll find that the law is on our side. Trina knew she was being recorded, and even if she didn't, well, I'm sure the press would love to get their hands on this juicy little tidbit. Imagine the headlines. CEO's mistress caught on tape mocking his manhood. Your reputation would be ruined. Greg's face crumpled. He knew he was beaten. What do you want? He asked hoarsely. I leaned forward, my eyes locked on his. I want you to resign, effective immediately. I want you to sign over your shares in the company to me, and I want you to agree to a divorce settlement that gives me everything, including sole custody of our children. Greg's jaw clenched. And if I refuse? I shrugged. Then I release the recording to every media outlet in the country, and I make sure that everyone knows what a pathetic, dishonest, cheating scumbag you really are." For a long moment, Greg just stared at me, his eyes burning with impotent fury. Then, with a sigh of defeat, he reached for a pen. "Fine," he spat. "You win, Amber. I hope you're happy." I smiled. "Oh, I am, Greg. Believe me, I am." With that, Jill and I turned and walked out of his office, leaving him to stew in his own misery. News of Greg's sudden resignation spread like wildfire. By the end of the day, it was all anyone could talk about. Speculation ran rampant about the reasons behind it, but I kept my mouth shut. I had what I wanted. Greg was finished, and Trina was next. I didn't have to wait long for her to come crawling back, begging for mercy. She showed up at my door that very night, mascara streaked down her face and reeking of cheap vodka. "Please, Amber," she slurred. "You have to help me. Greg fired me. He said he never wants to see me again. I have nothing, no job, no money. I don't know what I'm going to do." I looked at her coldly. "That sounds like a you problem, Trina. You should have thought about that before you decided to wreck a marriage and ruin people's lives." She started to sob. "I'm sorry, okay? I made a mistake. I never meant for any of this to happen. Please, just give me another chance." I laughed harshly. "You really don't get it, do you, Trina? This was never about giving you another chance. This was about making you pay for what you did to me. And now, thanks to your own big mouth, you're going to spend the rest of your miserable life paying for it." I reached into my pocket and pulled out a flash drive. "This is a copy of the recording, Trina. The one where you bragged about seducing my husband and mocked me behind my back. I've already sent copies to every HR department in the city. Good luck finding a job after they hear what you're really like." Trina's face drained of color. "No," she whispered. "No, please. I'll do anything. Just don't ruin my life like this." I smiled coldly. "You ruined your own life, Trina. I'm just making sure you never forget it. Now get the hell off my property before I call the cops." With a final anguished wail, Trina turned and stumbled back to her car. I watched as she drove away, knowing that I had finally won. Greg was gone, Trina was destroyed, and I was free to start my life over on my own terms. It was a heady feeling, knowing that I had taken back the power that had been stolen from me. I knew there would be challenges ahead, that rebuilding my life wouldn't be easy. But for the first time in a long time, I felt like I could face anything. I was Amber Thompson, survivor, and I had come out on top. 6 months later, I was sitting in my favorite cafe, sipping a latte and scrolling through the headlines on my phone. A familiar name caught my eye, and I felt a surge of grim satisfaction. "Disgraced former assistant Trina Myers arrested for shoplifting." The headline blared. I clicked on the article, my eyes scanning the text quickly. Apparently, Trina had been caught trying to steal a pair of expensive shoes from a department store. When security had confronted her, she had broken down in tears, sobbing that she had no money and nowhere else to turn. I felt a twinge of pity for her, remembering how that had once been me. Desperate, alone, with no idea how I was going to survive. But the feeling passed quickly. Trina had brought this on herself, with her greed and her cruelty. She deserved everything that was happening to her. My phone buzzed with an incoming call, and I glanced at the screen. It was my agent. I smiled as I answered. "Amber, darling," she trilled. "I have the most amazing news. You'll never guess who just called me." "Who?" I asked, already knowing the answer. "Steven Spielberg's people. They want you to audition for the lead role in his new movie. I told you that scandal with your ex-husband would be the best thing that ever happened to your career. Everyone in Hollywood is talking about you." I felt a rush of excitement. After years of struggling to make it as an actress, I was finally getting my big break. And I had Greg and Trina to thank for it, in a twisted way. Their betrayal had given me the motivation I needed to fight for what I wanted. "That's amazing, Jen," I said. "When's the audition?" "Next week, but don't worry, I know you'll nail it. You've got that raw, authentic quality that directors love. Plus, with all the buzz around your personal life, they'd be crazy not to cast you." I laughed. "Well, I guess I should thank Greg for being such a cheating scumbag then. It's the best thing he ever did for me." Jen chuckled. "That's the spirit, honey. Listen, I've got to run, but I'll email you the details for the audition. Break a leg." I hung up the phone, feeling a sense of giddy anticipation. I was really doing it. I was taking back control of my life and making my dreams come true. And I didn't need Greg or anyone else to do it. As if on cue, my phone buzzed again. This time, it was a text from an unknown number. Frowning, I opened it. "I hope you're happy, you fucking bitch," it read. "You ruined my life. I have nothing now, thanks to you. I hope you rot in hell." I felt a chill run down my spine. It was from Greg. Even after all these months, he was still trying to blame me for his own mistakes. My fingers hovered over the screen, ready to type out a scathing reply. But then I stopped myself. Greg wasn't worth my time or energy anymore. He was a pathetic, broken man, lashing out at anyone he could blame for his own failings. I deleted the message and blocked his number. He was my past, and I was done letting him have any power over me. I finished my latte and gathered up my things, ready to head to my next audition. As I stepped out into the bright sunlight, I couldn't help but smile. Sure, my life had been turned upside down by Greg and Trina's betrayal. But in the end, I had come out stronger, wiser, and more determined than ever to succeed. I was Amber Thompson, actress, survivor, and queen of my own destiny. And nothing and no one was going to stop me from getting what I wanted. As I walked down the street, my head held high, I caught a glimpse of my reflection in a store window. The woman staring back at me was barely recognizable from the naive, trusting girl I had once been. But that was okay. That girl was gone now, replaced by someone tougher, smarter, and more resilient. Someone who knew how to fight for herself and never let anyone take advantage of her again. I had been through hell and back, but I had emerged victorious. And as I looked to the future, I knew that nothing could stop me now. I was ready for my close-up, and the world had better be ready for me.